G'day, welcome to People Purpose Place and our regular Monday night catch up. How we doing?
Think about that, didn't you?
Yeah. I had to work out what day of the week it was. I lost track there for a moment. It's not the end of the world though.
No.
How are you, Darren?
Yeah, good. Yeah, really good. Good to catch up.
Likewise, it's always good to have a bit of a natter, all things housing.
Yes.
This week we have our third amigo under the weather still. So you got the terrible duo. And we're talking about all things that actually may blow up the internet completely, talking about the building code, which may or may not seem all that topical, but we're in 2023 already, and we're talking about the implementation of the 2022 version of the building code. And that in itself is somewhat illustrative. So, Darren, how's the week been? Do you feel ready to take on this challenge and accept the wrath from all the naysayers out there who think things shouldn't change in the construction industry and the code should be left perfectly fine the way it is with the 2019 version?
Yeah, no, I'm keen to have the conversation. It's always, even if, depending on who the audience is, some of this might get very technical and a bit involved, but I do enjoy the chance to have a conversation with you about the different sorts of topics that go to housing. And I know People Purpose Place is about big picture views, which is,
yes.
Hey, how does a group of people decide to come together? How do they decide to form a small community at a household level? And how do they then fit that into a dwelling and live in it? But we always find in our journey that people quite often jump to the tic-tac-toes, don't they? What does this look like? Oh, well,
yes.
I haven't really got the other bits right yet. So we're going to do the reverse today, which is actually jump in the technical, because at some point you need to have a balanced understanding of all of these levels. And you're right that one of the things that we joked about when we were having a brief conversation today was that we've been talking about some of these things. I think I did some of my sustainability training in about 2010, 9-10. And it was about 11, 12 that we started talking about housing accessibility and starting to include those options in there. So the industry is just flabbergasted that these 2022 changes have just jumped upon us. And, it was like a jaguar hiding in the bush, and it just jumped out and pounced on us with energy efficiency and accessibility. But based on those two dates, we've been talking about them for somewhere between 10 and 13 years. And maybe, not that I really want to go down this rabbit hole, but I have always been highly proactive that industry should be the leader, and we shouldn't be legislated, because the problem with legislation is that it's hard to unwind, right? So once we add red tape, we quite often don't go unreading the tape. It just continues to get deeper in tape. So one conversation would be that industry needs to lead this conversation, or this occurs, where eventually the government says, okay, I've had enough of this. We're now just going
the government's led by consumers' feedback, who say at the last election, all of you are out. We want these bunch of people who are offering something different. So, the politicians are actually responding to, and maybe they've got the skills and maybe they don't. Maybe it's not a great way to do it, but they are responding to consumer sentiment, saying, hey, we want housing that's adapted to our environment.
Great talk. Exactly. And so, to some extent, almost industry needs to take this on the chin, because to some extent we've had the opportunity to adopt it and to be leaders in the space. And, we're not blowing our own trumpet, but we've been doing some of these things for a very long period of time. But as far as us getting the average person on the street to say, hey, would you consider going to an 8-star home rather than the 6-star thing that everyone else is doing? That's not a conversation that we have with a lot of people. As much as we try and preempt it, it doesn't go very far. And it would be the same if I had said over the last short period of time, hey, by the way, do you think we should think about having all of our doors at 820 or 920? You're not. No one's having that conversation. So I think, this will be really, and I think we probably need just a little, not be totally facetious about this whole conversation, because there are some real elements that, people who are going into even building their own home or considering doing stuff, or maybe even doing a renovation, might go, hey, by the way, should I be considering these things too? Because one day all new homes are going to look like this. So eventually, is that going to flow on to renovations and extensions or to other sorts of things? So,
yeah, and are you leaving yourself already with an obsolete thing when you're doing a major renovation and you haven't considered the current building code consideration? We're probably getting a bit ahead of ourselves. I thought to check in as to model our practice of setting the scene. Maybe we could think about, although we don't regularly see accessible design in a bathroom or our living spaces, what have your experiences been of accessible spaces when you've seen them and when you've noticed them, Darren?
Yeah, well, I suppose the one that jumps out for me is that we don't generally notice them in houses, like unless you actually go into a house of someone who has had a disability, or maybe if you're lucky enough to go into something we might have built over the years. But other than that, generally you only find them in commercial spaces, right? So you go to a hotel and you go, I noticed there's something different about this one. It's got grab rails or it's got whatever. My comment has been that it's never normally a holistic process. And I remember you and I, we went out to Richmond and we went and spoke to the councils out there about the aging population and what that might mean. And we stayed in this, it was an accessible unit. I think it might have been the only one available. But we were intrigued by the fact they had these beautiful ramps to the front door, and they had this massive bathroom which had water going everywhere, not running to the water waste. But you couldn't actually get a wheelchair in the door. So they made this beautiful accessible bathroom, which was still not done to standard, but you just couldn't get there. So my point is, I hope this is done holistically, and I hope it's not done for red tape, because my concern is I'm reading some of the provisions that they're talking about, and they're already starting to say, if it's not at all practical, well, you can provide an exemption and you can do this and you can do that. And there are some pineapples in the wording. I will say that there's probably some people scratching their heads about how we're going to achieve that. But yeah, I just hope, my lesson from other stuff is I hope they do it holistically and they don't just stick a grab rail on the wall and call the house accessible. What about yourself?
Yeah, and much the same sort of experience, that it's still the outlier and the exception. When you notice it and see it, you go, oh, that's actually a space that works, or there's sufficient room. In a commercial hotel, you go, I'm carrying my bags, I haven't checked in, I'm going to this toilet space. Oh, and there's room for me to turn around with a suitcase. So you go, oh, that's different. I hadn't noticed that before in regular design. But absolutely, as you say, it seems to be more of those spaces seem to be an outlier. There's no reason that they can't paint them and tile them and have the same decoration as the rest of the space. But they seem to build them the nuclear hospital industrial version, white and white, rather than keeping the rest of the commercial spaces look and feel. Which says to me that they're building it as this other thing, much like a compliance checkbox ticking this thing, rather than incorporating the principle and the intent into how they're doing construction. And I think that's still the challenge, is we know and feel in good spaces and construction that works really well, because it doesn't feel like it's been designed for a wheelchair accessibility. It just feels comfortable to get around.
Yes,
you might be carrying two bags of groceries and you find, I can get through this hallway and this doorway. and it's not a stress, rather than climbing up 2 stairs into a doorway and turning 90 degrees is just poor design. Whether it's accessible
Yeah.
or otherwise, it's really clunky.
I think that's a very good point, actually, is the fact that quite often we sort of think of accessible housing as about, this is to allow a disabled person to get a wheelchair in. But in actual fact, a lot of it is just really good design principles for the average person. I mean, we're all going to get a rolled ankle or a sore hip or a sore knee.
Totally.
I tried to attempt to jog today, so tomorrow I will need a fully accessible home. So yeah, I mean, it's just good design. I mean, we've all been, and the one that always gets me all the time is we've all grown up and probably been in the house with the bath over shower, and
Yes.
that's dangerous as all get out. So a lot of these provisions, a lot of these provisions aren't necessarily, about just purely providing a house suitable for a disabled occupant. They're actually just better to be in. I think we also got a comment there from someone watching that we might just touch back on later, which is just about really this balance between the industry dream being driven by developers and what that means to the end goal, and also this fine line between when do we have enough regulation and when do we have too much regulation. Because I think the comment has been that maybe if you don't have enough, people do too much crazy stuff. But then if you have too much, then what's the flip side of that? So maybe as we get to the end, we might add that conversation back in there as being a poignant thing to be talking about, because, there's no doubt that is definitely part of the picture, isn't it? With is what is regulation, and, how much is too much, and, when should we do it, when shouldn't we do it?
And I guess not to dwell on it for too long, but to be clear about people, purpose, place. Our role is generally not to be in this minutiae detail, and we're not the construction business. But
yes,
fundamentally, we do understand that if you know the architecture, the environment, the space that you're playing in, and if you understand the rules of the game, whatever they may be, and they're about to change to a 2022 version, if you understand them, you can navigate them with less pain and less trip-ups and less complication. And if you can spend less time stressing about door widths and accessibility requirements or 7-star rating, you can actually spend more of your time thinking about having a home where people thrive, which is the fundamental goal, what we're here for. So we're not actually here or considering a home for its compliance of 7 stars, although that's a necessary part of the environment that we operate in. Whereas I think very much in the construction industry, for a bunch of reasons, the mindset is very much focused around the compliance, and almost not at all what the human needs in the housing outcome.
That's a good point. That is actually an exceptional point, is the fact that, we're talking about this compliance thing right now and what it might mean to people and all that sort of stuff. But in reality, none of this is actually talking about the occupant or how they're going to live in there or any of those things. And I think that's so true, because we have these new provisions, which we'll get onto, about, going from 6 stars to 7 stars. Yep. But we know there's no use having a 10-star house if you've got a 1-star user, right? So the use of that house far outweighs any design mechanism that's put in there. And I'm interested to see, and we'll talk about it when we get there, about the 2 ways they're looking at energy efficiency. And one of those is thermal performance, and the other one is an electrical budget. And I'll just pass. I was a little bit distracted there because I saw something pop up on the screen, and it was the Courier Mail has just made an announcement, right? So Brisbane's home prices have dropped 11% in 7 months. Only what we've been saying, but no one's been listening. That we can have all the price rises that we want and all those other things, but at some point, if people can't afford them, so that's a very, very interesting stat, and probably something we'll come back on to another day. But for them to publish that, those are pretty big numbers. And a lot of people have been sort of, nah, she's all right, mate. But 11% ain't. She's all right.
Yep. And so many of these issues, we have to, I think it's better to ask what's the intent behind the regulation or what the change has been. And if we work with good intent and are aligned to that principle, hey, we want people to have better performing houses, maybe that will result in, if they have better behaving humans and they understand how to use their house better, they'll have lower power bills and utility costs and ongoing impact on the environment. All of that would be good. So I think we can comfortably align with that intent. But the challenge is when we are only looking at the compliance and arguing about tic-tac-toes, we lose completely the purpose of what it is that we're doing. And we end up with this chasing around, and then we have to say things like housing prices are all good because it's the only thing you've got going for you. You haven't actually factored in the intent behind what we're doing with these houses.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's probably a good segue to maybe talk about the adoption period. So I dig up some information about, and this is actually quite interesting. It's probably another side conversation we don't have to have, but one of the statements is the NCC, National Construction Code 2022, is now available on NCC online. I don't know where most building occurs. It's not generally in front of a computer, but it's good that it's online. So when they get home after they've done the work wrong, they can go, oh, look, that's where I've done, that's where I've gone wrong. But the building ministers, God bless them, and now have made the provisions live, and they'll be adopted in states and territories on 1 May 2023. But wait, the industry's been given some transitional arrangements for the following specific requirements. The new livable housing requirements will actually commence in October of this year, 23. New energy efficiency and condensation mitigation will start in October of 23. And new lead-free plumbing product requirement will go September 25, because a couple of extra years of poisoning can't hurt anyone. So let's just drag it out and see how we go with that. So, yeah, I mean, what do you think about the adoption dates?
like really snuck up on us, and then we have to, and in our experience, this has been the general industry default setting, is delay, defer, distract. So to talk about lead in our environment, and I think we raised this earlier when we were talking about air pollution with Professor Anne.
Yes.
As the world, we agreed to take lead out of our petrol because it was lubricating our engines as a lead thing. And we found that it actually had this negative impact, particularly on children. And the deletion of that lead has raised globally IQ levels by a measurable amount.
Yeah.
So humans have got smarter.
Considering some of the people I know, if there's a measurable increase, imagine what happens.
Hello, what have we done?
But you're right. Yeah.
So there are these big global impacts of these changes, yet we're haggling about lead for a couple more years because why? I want to sell out. I want to sell through the stock I've got existing on the shelf, or there's an enormous, cost impost for changing this fitting for that fitting.
Yeah, and I don't know. There must be some component. I have to go and check it. I must admit, not up on my metallurgy. That's not even a word, but you get what I was talking about.
Yeah.
There must be some lead in copper, is there? I think there must be some element of copper, because that is part of the provision, is how do they get some of the lead componentry out of copper piping.
Yeah,
And interestingly enough, we've just gone, we don't know, we've talked about these things over the years, the plough was a great idea. We finally didn't have to, pull the fields by hand. We could get a oxen behind there. But the flow-on effects to do with societal change and all of those other things which could not be predicted by that, I think the same conversation will be with copper. The same conversation will be with changing all of our pipes over to plastic. Like, I don't know yet a plastic that doesn't have some ability to break down. I'm sure there is, and maybe there's smarter people than you or I who know exactly why going to plastic pipes that are getting hotter now in climate and cold and all sorts of stuff, it's having absolutely no impact on a human. Maybe that's the case, but I think there'll be a lot of stuff there where the people will be scratching their heads at that. But yeah, I agree with you. Like, if we're going to adopt it, why just wait another 2 years? And to be honest with you, even getting to October sounds like we're just looking for another reason to push it back more time beyond that. Because originally I think it was supposed to be September of last year, and then it just went, oh no, we'll put it off to May, and then we've got some specific exemptions for the big hard ones. Because, and as you said, even people we know in the industry, and we're no different, like we're talking about these topics now, right?
Where'd you go,
it's not
Darren?
like, yeah, that's right. But we know people who we class and have a lot of respect for as far as their technical knowledge within the industry. They're like, I'll get to it. Because a few things going on in the building industry. So, house prices just dropped by 11%. So they're off not focusing on a few other things. So, yeah, I mean, the adoption period to me, it strikes me as being a bit laughable that we're still providing, talking about those things.
Kick the can down the road. It really isn't. Imagine if the response was, let's be proactive and these will deliver healthier human outcomes. To remove lead from our home would be a human benefit, and to make them more thermally comfortable for longer apparently might be necessary given that we are changing the environment.
Yes.
Just the response could be completely flipped on its head and would make so much more sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does seem like I'm just having a bit of a look. Oh, yeah. So we got overview of changes, and we'll probably dive into a couple of these in a bit more detail. But the general overview includes, the big ticket items are energy efficiency and condensation.
Yep.
They're talking about performance of structural items, health and amenity, structural safety, which is interesting. I think they're reviewing there's some minor reviews, specifically in some of the cyclonic wind rating and a few of those sorts of things.
Yep.
We know that energy efficiency is in there, livable housing or housing accessibility, fire safety, plumbing and drainage minor changes, and probably the two big ones I think would be the energy efficiency, which I said before, and then changes to access and egress of properties, which comes under the livable housing provisions, which probably might be maybe a good place to start. And I noticed, and probably to your point before about having an intention, I noticed the ABCB has made the comment that this is what they're trying to cover: providing a step-free access to your home, making doorways and hallways easier to use for people with reduced mobility, providing extra space in the bathroom and toilet, and reinforcing the bathroom and toilet to make sure that when you go to install grab rails in the future, that it's easier.
And some of those things maybe consumers and listeners aren't aware, but if you try and modify the most expensive rooms in your house, which are your bathrooms, and they haven't been considered for grab rails at the future,
Yep.
they are far and away the most expensive spaces to mess around with,
Yep.
and can be catastrophic if you put a screw through your tile and hit the water supply. Now you've got a leak inside your wall and you have to pull the whole thing apart. So, things can go wrong quite dramatically and be the most expensive part of your house if it's done poorly.
I think also you might have mentioned some time ago about, I think it's 32 times more expensive to retrofit items for accessibility than it was to do them in the first instance. And I wonder whether, although we've got some, the ABCB in there, being so generous, so talking about, making use it for people with reduced mobility, you don't have to read in between the lines that the reality of that is probably the aging population, because the reality of reduced mobility, although we all might have injuries and those sorts of things, the amount of people as a percentage of the population who actually have a disability, I think might have been impaired mobility, might have been somewhere around about 16%. I would have to check that again to see whether that was right, but actual disabilities is in the low percentile. So this is more than just being about those two areas. It's talking about aging, and it's talking about just making houses, safer for everyone in them. But on face value,
I like to look at it as whole of life rather than any particular demographic. If you think about childhood, teenager, young adult, parenting, now I've got to get kids in and out of a bathtub or whatever it is. I'm now carrying school bags and groceries and trying to juggle 3 kids at the same time. The more space I've got to do all that makes sense. And then into your eldership and your twilight years, absolutely it makes sense.
Yes.
But to me, that says whole of life rather than any particular single stage.
Yes, and I think you made the statement, which someone else had sort of mentioned to you in conversation over the years, but this idea of one house, many chapters is actually something that people should think about. People are so fixated on where they are now that sometimes they forget where they're going to be by the time their design process finishes. And obviously that can mean going from completely able to being, disabled or less than able, or just getting older and just going, hang on, this is just, unrealistic for me to navigate around. So, that makes a lot. I don't think there's anything in there that really say, hey, these are bad things and they shouldn't be done. It's interesting that they make these statements after that these new parts include a performance-based approach to provide flexibility and encourage new and innovative ways to meet these requirements. Exemptions for situations where full compliance may be impractical or unreasonable. And then we have the old DTSs, the old deemed to satisfy provisions that provide a standardized prescriptive recipe to meet performance requirements suitable for most common designs and construction methods. So interesting that they've raised all of those. Is there a situation you can think where, look, these are really great, these ideas, and it's great they've thrown them in there, but when would this just be impractical or unreasonable?
I can't. I mean, retrofitting, and if you think about particularly the heavy kinds of constructions of an old church building or a heritage listed building, some of those things are going to have real challenges to modify access and thoroughfares because of the limitation of the structure. But these are a handful of exemptions across the country, right? There's 6 buildings in each city.
I think it's fair to say though, like generally they're aiming these at new homes, so they're not. I don't think they're going to. So I think there could be some. We've built over the years maybe on some sloping sites where you go, a step-free path travel from the boundary to the front door. Have fun with that.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that they haven't just said, look, everyone's got to do this, because there are some, situations where it's just not going to be practical to do that. Or, we've gone to shorter and shorter front setbacks. So if you've got to rise a meter in that distance, how exactly do you do that without having this, some sort of ramp zigzag across your block 100 times to get through? I do find it interesting that they still allow for performance-based approach to provide flexible and encourage ways for innovation to meet requirements, because how are you going to do that when you go to your certifier? And I think I was only speaking to someone from an industry association who I won't name, who was like, who checks this stuff? So you go to make a certifier application and you've gone, look, I've got this really, and I occasionally use, I say innovative rather than innovative, and people always call me up. But say you come up with this really innovative way to deal with the problem, right? And you've gone to your certifier and said, look, I'm going to have a skyhook on every house to get these suckers in the front. What do you reckon? Now, no certifier in his right mind is going to go, oh, I'm all in. Like, that's very innovative.
Yeah. Perfect. Sign me up.
Just when they leave, like, it's not as innovative as, well, they were there when the house was built, though. So although they have these exemptions there of, hey, you can have these really cool way of getting around this problem, I can't actually see that ever occurring. So everyone's going to be looking at the deemed to satisfy DTS to try and find a way through there. Number 2 says a step-free level entrance to the dwelling that can incorporate a ramp or a threshold to a maximum height. The door sill can be used with restrictions to a height profile. A landing would also be required at the entrance. A minimum, this is the devil's in the detail bits that you and I look at, a minimum of 820 mil clear width opening for the entrance door, doors to habitable rooms, sanitary compartments, and laundry where located on that entrance level. So obviously, if you've got 2 levels, you don't have to do that in other areas. The opening must be clear of the door leaf and door stops and rebates, but the door handle can encroach. So that's interesting, because we know the door sizes are 820, 620, 720, 820, 920, a meter and 20, 1200. Those are things we can ring up our local supplier and say, hey, can I have one of those? Generally, it's going to be 2040 high, so 2 meters and 40 high, or you can get a 2340. But that's sort of
off the shelf. Yep.
Correct. So you go and put 2 door stops on your 820 door, which is probably the largest door supply in Australia, and you're technically non-compliant.
Correct.
There's
no argument. You are non-compliant.
Yeah, and I find it interesting is that the door handle can encroach, and by doing work in the NDIS space and SDA space, we know that's not normally the case in those situations.
In those situations, they'll even measure your mouldings on your skirting and say
that's right.
Not sufficient doorway clearance, not sufficient width of the room.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And that's where the 820s are going to become a challenge, because you have your door stop, which travels around the inside of your door jamb, and your actual clear opening is 800 and 800 mil. So it will be interesting to see whether door manufacturers go to making an 840 as a way around that, because realistically going to a 920, while it sounds like I just go up to the next door size, that would probably mean in some instances, that, how do you fit that into the door width? Because by the time you go a 920, then the jamb, then the studs, then you've got to architrave it. Sometimes in some hallways, that might mean the hallway has just grown by 100 or 200 mil. Now, a lot of the ramifications of things that is just go and do that, right? But if you add 100 mil through a home that's 20 meters long, just added 2 square meters, if that square meterage of it's $1,675, you just added $3,200 and whatever dollars to the cost of that house, and we just saw that the price has just dropped by 11%.
Going the wrong way. Yep.
So there is a little bit of difficult in the details that I think people just take for granted. that's going to be easy to comply with, and that may not be the case.
I think, like anything, if you have and if you've got teenagers or young blokes who are studying at university in your house, and
Yes.
if you've left your assignment deadline to the last minute to crack on and get into it, everything is escalated to panic mode. It's all a major issue. 8:20, 9:20. Oh my God, I'm a teapot, and it all becomes magnified. But if we had been using the past 13 years to digest this information and go, how do we transition from 13 years ago, I think it was started in Queensland at 3.5 stars. And, okay, how do we transition from 3.5 stars 13 years ago to 7 stars today? In a gradual, methodical, slowly, continual improvement process. Plenty of cultures, plenty of, worldwide, the Japanese methodology of continual improvement, 5 whys, keep asking why we do it this way, keep asking why. And it's just ingrained in what you do, and it doesn't become any sort of challenge to navigate your way through this change. However, if your response is what industry is at the moment is, how do we delay? How do we distract? How do we pretend it's not real? And then at the last moment have to have it implemented by politicians saying October 1 you'll have to do this. It's going to hurt. It's going to be a lot of people saying that it's the end of the world, but in actual fact they've had a long deadline and they've just ignored it to the last minute.
Yeah. One of the other provisions here I noticed is a toilet on the ground or entrance level with the minimum width of opposing walls either side of the pan and 1.2 meters clear space to the door swing in front of the pan. The minimum width must be measured to the wall linings, but skirtings and architraves can encroach. So I don't think any of that is, there's a few areas, we used to have the doors swinging in some areas, which will probably cause some issues. So you're going to have some out-swinging toilet doors, I think will be a solution you see a bit of, which, maybe creates some other issues. You're getting smacked in the face when you walk up to those areas. But the rest of that, doesn't seem like it's crazy. We do know that we went to lift off hinges under the pretext that, if someone has a heart attack and falls over in front of the pan, that you can't basically get in to help them, right? So some of this is about saying, hey, if someone does have an issue, how do we get in and help them? So really practical safety things. It's not just, hey, we're doing this because we feel like it. One shower in the dwelling that is step-free and hobless. The shower does not have to be located on the ground entry level. And step-free for the shower means a maximum 5 mil or a rebate in the shower, so the shower screen can still be used. So that's that could create a few challenges in some instances, but I don't think anything there is massive. There has been a bit of a movement towards the wet room anyway, hasn't there?
Yes, yeah. So we're seeing, I guess, there's differences in single level and multiple level construction, but if it's all on the ground level or the level of access to the property, then none of that's a challenge to deliver. And lots
it is
of
interesting that there is a note, and we obviously did find out just recently we were working on some of that waterproofing stuff, and we did notice that the definition of a wet room is something that doesn't have a shower screen. So if you have a shower screen, you can use the normal waterproofing provisions, but if you remove that, then you have to waterproof the whole area under the pretext that it could get wet. I do find it interesting that says this shower does not have to be located on the ground or entry level. Now, to me, that's that's the same application as us going out to Richmond and going into an accessible bathroom you can't get into, because the idea of having your accessible shower on the second story of your home that you have to go upstairs for, to me, is just ticking a box. Like it's not.
Yes.
That's not the intention, is it? Like
No.
that's
No.
what you were talking to before. So reinforcing to the framing surrounding the toilet, bathroom, and shower, such as nogging or sheeting for future installation of grab rails. There'll be a concession when there is insufficient space in the room or an opening encroaches to an area that will be reinforced. That all sounds pretty straightforward. Interestingly enough, garage carports would need to be okay. It still meant that need to be at the same floor height as the house level.
Yeah, right.
With the maximum threshold, which we know is something that is particularly an issue for a lot of people, and that might be a challenge of sloping sites to make that happen.
Correct.
Additionally, the carports in this situation need to be a minimum of 3.2 meters wide and 5.4 meters long. So nothing in that.
I think the 3.2 is allowing the to alight and get in and get out of your car with a wheelchair adjacent, so your door full width open. So we've got perhaps a regular garage space, and you can actually sneak two cars in there, but you got to post a bloody playing card between the two cars, and so you leave the windows down to Dukes of Hazzard over the bonnet into your car, because it's met the minimum requirement, but that's about it.
Yeah, so that conversation about actually, now that I reread that, keeping the garage and the living area and your normal habitable area height the same, negates your need to have a step-free entrance. So the idea is you can come in through the garage to get around that issue, which
makes sense, as you pointed out, a sloping block. So if you then drive your car into the garage and that provides you the access point, that makes sense. You may have to, and some of those things would be considered if you see a roof-mounted wheelchair arrangement with the hoist. You're going to need a taller garage than commonly are delivered.
Yes. And you're right here. I mean, I've noted they've made some exemptions that are in place is where the site exceeds 1 in 14.
Yep.
Where there is insufficient space between the boundary and the building, which is what we talked about before. Why the house would require excessive ramping to achieve compliance, as you said, whipping across the block 5 times, is located in a flood hazard area. Well, that makes a lot of sense. You're doing a bit of that work at the moment. Mm-hmm. So obviously dropping everything down so you can get in there is not so good when the flood comes in as well. And where there is a difference in the habitable rooms that would negate excessive ramping, e.g. if you're building an old Queenslander, then trying to get this thing to work might not be the most practical of things. So
it's interesting doing some of that flood repair work. Some of the suggestions that I've had customers come to me with saying the resilience solution says, raise it near 3.7 meters. And I'm going, what? I don't know if you've checked a tape measure recently. 3.7 straight up is a bloody long way. How are you calling that an accessible home? You're going to need a cut lunch and a jetpack to get up to it.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Common sense needs to apply.
Yeah, and I think that'll be always, the devil will be in the detail and who wants to administer that. And if it's a certifier, then that might be a challenge. And that's probably I know there'd been a comment in the chat there before, just in regards to before we maybe go into the energy efficiency, which is probably the other big one. This discussion around when do we need compliance, when don't we need compliance. This one is now being essentially forced upon us, because the industry hasn't made any actions. So now these are put into a construction code. So you'll be arguing about definitions rather than about intention, because it's now in the code.
Yep.
But my question to you is, do you think the industry ever could have got to adopt these two changes without regulation occurring?
I'm absolutely convinced that the economic cost to make these changes and the technical skill required to make these changes is perfectly capable within the industry skill set. The industry, we can go from 820 to 920s and we can do this and we can do that all day, every day. But they have never had the intent. And since they have never had the intent to do anything but compliance, and that's evidenced in so many ways in all of our construction code. When Queensland went from 3.5 stars to 5-star thermal performance requirement, with exemptions, whatever the caveats were, surprisingly, just every single one of the certified approved sets of plans started coming across the desk at 5 stars. None of them went to 6 stars. None of them went to 7 stars. Nobody said, hey, let's use this thing to do a high performance outcome. No. They only came across the compliance desk as 5 stars. And then we went from 5 to 6, same thing. Nobody's exceeded the minimum, given that we like to rinse and repeat the same design.
Yeah.
Chances are absolutely that this design will be orientated and get a better performance just by virtue of being on a different block of land.
Yeah,
so you don't,
that's right, because orientations, yeah.
You don't have to do anything different. If it's better orientated on the same design, you should get a variance in your thermal performance.
Yeah, and that's interesting because, and yeah, you're right. I mean, I think when we've actually gone a few times to maybe Andrew Barrett from Green at Heart, who's one of those people who's very passionate about using the energy rating tools. One of the interesting things is when we go to and talk to him about, hey, we're trying to improve this design together, he goes, you're trying to what? Like everyone else just asking me for a compliance, like, how cool is this, And even when we've been talking about what a green loan could be and how could we maybe show properties that have a higher performance, then how would we validate that improved performance? And having a talking to an energy assessor and say, could we do a star rating before and a star rating after, and then say, this house is now better operating, it's a better place to be in. So banks who want to lend green money go, wow, this is something I can stand behind.
We can verify it's a real thing.
And I think the statement before in the comments was, which leads on from what you just said, was that, with the industry being stacked with developers with the main goal in life as promising lots and delivering is that is that question almost a veiled question of, if developers are driving in and they're more about profits than they are about people, do you think that although we have the capability, would we actually have naturally got to the point where we would have adopted 7-star and accessibility in our houses just by market conditions?
No.
I agree with you.
And 20 years ago, I chatted to a bloke who was towards the end of his building career and was sufficiently well off that he made a conscious choice because he liked the planet. He figured, look, I'm going to build green performing homes. I'm going to advertise them as green performing homes, and I'll charge 20% more. And I will only end up talking to clients who are like myself, have the capacity to pay more than 20% over the market price for the service. And he went on a learning journey to understand what that would look like. And he, Greg was the chap's name, and did some beautiful houses. Each of them were a custom design, and in the tropical North Queensland area. Drove a Toyota Prius way before they were as a builder's truck, right?
Wow.
So had a collapsible ladder in the back, and his toolkits, because it had a space saver wheel in. So he said, I can get all these tools in here. And he's very non-typical, trading truck, right?
Yeah.
But he didn't have to make sufficient, he didn't have to compete economically.
Yeah.
And
but you're talking about the 1% of the 1%, aren't you? Those people.
That's right.
So that's how much of the industry they're impacting. No disrespect. Like I I have absolute admiration for that person, having traveled that path and knowing how difficult it is. We need people who are willing to do that, to say there is an example. And Christine's, example to us was, you can't tell people, we know an electric car's out there, so there's your option, right? If you don't want to keep, giving money to the fuel company. But there isn't a lot of examples out there to show an alternative way with housing. So all power to him for taking those steps, because there's so few people showing people that. So, but I coming back to that point, I do agree with you wholeheartedly. I was an absolute advocate of just leave us alone and let industry do it. I've been sprouting that for years, and then I had to eat my hat, and it was an Akubra. It took a long time,
Very
one
chewy,
bite
I hear.
at a time, because I had to admit, and I think I admitted it to, it was the guy we were speaking to in Western Australia, Josh.
Yeah, Josh.
So, Josh from Josh's house, when he was interviewing me last time, I had to say to him, no, you're right. Industry isn't going to make these changes. We're going to have to, they're going to have to be regulated. And the flip side of regulation is some of these rules are going to be applied stupidly. So we've just said there's, these wonderful exemptions and people can do this, and 1 in 14. You're going to have the two sides of this. You're going to have the builder or developer who's trying to manipulate the rules to find a way around it, who'll come up with some stupid thing like, I've got this new door hanging system and I don't need door stops.
Yep.
Right?
So it's 820.
I'm sticking with my 820s, right?
Yep.
And then there'll be the genuine person who's going, this thing doesn't work here, dude. Like, I got this entrance in here. I got plenty of opening. I can get around there, but I just can't get to those. Bang, your design's finished. Add another 200 mil through the middle, 200 mil by 20 meters, cost you $3,500. I can't afford it. House prices have just fallen 11%. Can't you read? How am I going to afford this? So, that might be being facetious, but we've seen it. Like we've seen both ends of it.
Examples that on a daily basis.
So I think on the way out, probably the next one, which is something that we've both got a bit of a passion about, is obviously energy efficiency has been changed with two components. A minimum level of thermal performance of new homes is raised to the equivalent of 7 stars under the National House Energy Rating Scheme. NAFA's inside the industry is the acronym we refer to. This will deliver a significant improvement in thermal performance to the occupants. Congratulations. A new whole of home annual energy use budget now needs to be met by new homes before the people move in, I assume. This budget
just don't turn anything on.
Applies to the use of energy of a home's heating and cooling equipment, hot water systems, lighting, swimming pool, and spa pumps. Renewable energy systems such as rooftop solar panels aren't mandatory, but can also be installed to keep your home's energy number underneath the budget. Wow. What do you think about those ones?
Just, again, gaming the system. We've already seen a investor build 40 homes in a job lot and not install the appliances. So by this rationale, those houses will be gold bricks. They'll be perfect. Now, he didn't install the appliances because he didn't want anyone to occupy them, and he was happy to have them sitting idle and capital gain and get his money out of a foreign country into Australia. And it was just a financial mechanism, right?
Yep.
But that exact playing of the game is what people will do. I'll put less stuff in. I'll put everything on so it's measuring the hardwired components of the house.
Yeah.
So if you change to air conditioners can be put on a plug. So put a power point in, put your air conditioner on a plug.
Good way around it.
There you go.
I like your thinking. Easy as, bro.
Easy as.
And we also know, like, in just being silly about it, like, and just being the parody of this situation, we know that if you reduce all the size of your windows, you let in less heat gain, right? So let's build a house with all 600 by 600 windows, 7 stars, easy as, high five. It's dark in here, and we keep running into the walls. We got the lights on all the time, but they're a low efficient one, so we're right as long as we don't have. And, so it's just this silliness, and I know we're making light of it, and I get the intention, but we also know that that when we've spoken to Dr. Wendy, and we probably shouldn't use her name, and this is, we'll put a disclaimer in there, but there has been a lot of review of homes that have been built at, say, whatever the star rating. We've declared this thing as 6 stars, right?
Yep.
They go back and test it and it barely gets to 3.
Yep.
Or some such thing. So
at least
there will be
below what it was supposed to be theoretically.
So this may be incremental, moving from, if it's 2 stars or 3 stars below, maybe we're actually getting to 3. So by the time we get to 10, we're actually building 7s. So that's it's all a bit of a silly sort of a game. And the same with the budgeting side of things. You can see that the renewable energy system people must just be rubbing their hands together, because just whack, like it sounds like, just whack a 3.5 kilowatt system at, say it's $3,500, and then just do your darndest. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's basically saying you've counteracted what your theoretical movement is. So then crank on all your air conditioners, leave that pool pump on and spa pump, because you got your tick before you moved in there. Again, there is no conversation about the person and how you're going to use it.
And the biggest game we know, so maybe we're probably getting close to time, but we know the energy cost in building the house, so whatever the impact on the environment, all these resources, is a cost to deliver it, and here it is built.
Yes.
So that's far outweighed by the cost of operating that thing over its lifetime. So hypothetically, it's a 50-year lifetime. You have 2 teenagers, and you have your mum and dad and 2 cars and a dog, and you leave the windows open, and usual consumer behaviour. If we don't educate ourselves how to operate our house, we will still be turning the air conditioner on to 18 degrees, leaving the windows and doors open, wet towels on the floor, using the dryer to do the drying, and you go, why aren't we getting better thermal performance? This thing's an 8-star home. It should be doing better. We've got to engage as a community in the intent of what we're trying to do here. The intent is to save the planet. The intent is to have better performing housing.
Yes, 100%. And even if you're not in there for saving the planet, if you just want to have a lower cost of living and have, all those sorts of things. But we've all heard of those people when you ask them their power bill. I mean, there are these super energy conscious people out there turning off lights behind them and, don't have podcast lights and all that sort of stuff running. And even our parents, they grew up in a different time when there was 3 power points in the home and you turned off every light. And you build really good habits that help you become an efficient person. I agree with you. I think it is something they needed to do, but I just worry that industry will go, well, here's these 3 hacks. We'll get around this. And
deem dissatisfied with how I do it.
Yeah. And we'll come up with a recipe, and then we'll use those 2 things to jump around the actual delivery of important change. So on a high note, that wasn't very good. But I think it was good conversation tonight, and it was good to cover those things. And even by talking about them, I learn a lot, and I gain some perspective from having other people comment on stuff. So I think
it's good to see some feedback in the chat as well.
Yes,
and that's, we don't propose to have all the answers. We do spend some time with some high quality people, and we'll drop their name accordingly. But to do this research, this isn't just our own direct experience. There's been input from Dr. Wendy as an example.
Yes,
it's enormous. We're standing on the shoulders of people who've done the legwork to actually say to us, This is the delivered outcome, not the theory of what the star rating is of houses being built in Queensland, as an example.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Much appreciated to have those people around us and to have that input, because it helps inform all of our understanding of housing.
Yeah, 100%.
And what's this change likely to deliver? It'll deliver something, but I'm fairly confident it won't be change the intent of the industry to better performing housing.
100%. And I think we didn't get around to putting a little infographic up. So what we might do is actually might see whether CJ can actually just put that on the Innovation House and the People Purpose Place Facebook pages tomorrow as two snips. So you can see what the government is intending and what they're trying to do and what they hope are the performance standards out of that. And as you said, we've been a little bit facetious and a little bit tongue-in-cheek, and I think maybe we're have been a little bit jaded by a few of those experiences. But if the intention is delivered on, and I like your way of putting that makes a lot of sense to me, that if we hold that intent in our mind and we intend to do the outcomes there, then only good things can come from it. We know that people getting in the way of that will make it maybe less applicable, but certainly if we hold that intention in our mind, then it can only be a positive and good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's about that time of the week. We've done another one. Thank you very much. I appreciate these conversations, and it seems that we're gathering a bit of an audience as well, who are engaging and asking questions.
And I think just keeping these conversations going. I mean, I think even if we're yelling into the silence, I think getting the conversation started is something we've got to do. We've got to persist at. We've got to get it out there. The importance of what we're trying to achieve means that we need to take these steps, because once people get it, it can make an important change to people's lives.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir.
Thanks again for your time. And we'll see you next time. And hopefully we have Christine back. That's only if she's feeling okay. That's absolutely no pressure from that point of view. And I think we probably need to wrestle up another a guest for next week. And we'll try and put our thinking cap on for that event.
Yep. Brilliant.
Awesome.
Thanks for your time. Have a cracking evening.
You too. See